Hey friends, I'm Jeffy G. Look what I pulled out of the closet. You know that closet where you keep all your old music equipment, stuff you can't part with, or stuff you tried to sell but nobody would buy? Well, this falls into that category. This was my first MacBook, and it was bought in 2004, but it was expensive. It was over $3,000. And at the time, this 15-inch MacBook was state-of-the-art. It had 512 megabytes of RAM, and an 80 gigabyte hard drive, and I think it's running at 1.5 gigahertz. I did use this quite a bit. In fact, I recorded many songs and produced a lot of music on this. At the same time that I bought this, I bought Logic Pro. I think I bought version 3 or 4 directly from eMagic, and it was quite expensive. So this is before Apple acquired Logic. Okay, the packaging is amazing. Huge box. Take a look at this sucker. Part of the power cable. Still got the manual. Powerbook G4. At this stage, Apple was using the PowerPC. This is before they switched to Intel. And this was one of the last years that they made the MacBook Pro with the PowerPC. Pull out the foam. Here it is. Oh, it is not a light device. It's pretty heavy. And so I plugged in the power adapter. This is long before MagSafe. This is like an RCA jack, but it does have a little ring light around it. Tells you if it's charging. That's kind of cool. And the battery was completely dead, so I had to set the date and time. Next thing you notice is that the trackpad on here has no gestures. We're so used today to being able to scroll up and down and around, and you're like, oh, no gestures. I actually have to click on things, and it's much slower about this Mac. And it's running OSX version 10.5.8, which is not bad. That was probably the last operating system from Apple that would run on a PowerPC. I probably kept it right up to speed. So it says 1.5 gigahertz PowerPC G4, and the memory is 2 gigabytes. Now, I bought it with 512. I must have upgraded somewhere along the way, and 2 gigabytes was probably the maximum. It has Logic Pro. Let's see if it starts up. Logic Pro 8. I'm guessing that Logic Pro 8 was also the last version of Logic that would run on a PowerPC. It's checking for some MIDI drivers. It is connected to my local home network, and it's in the process of charging. You can see up in the top here, it's about 16% charged. Here we go. Yeah, that definitely looks like Logic. Interesting, the library is on the right. So if you're looking for an instrument via the library, browse on the right. Yeah, there we go. Ah, that doesn't look too different. If you're wondering why I'm recording it this way, is that the version of QuickTime has no screen capture. At this stage in the evolution of this machine, you had to buy third-party software if you wanted to be able to do video capture or screen capture. It wasn't built into the QuickTime player. Add a software instrument. Create. Ah, here they are. Well, you've got some of the old classics. EFM1, ESXi. Slightly different naming. They had M and S for mono and stereo. I remember one of the reasons I bought it back then was the Hammond B3 emulation was really good. The ePiano was excellent, very much like a Rhodes or Wurlitzer. And of course the sampler was new and quite flexible. You could do anything with the sampler. It had sculpture and ultrabeat, and you had access, of course, as always, to the GarageBand instruments. But I remember thinking the sampler was the big opportunity here. I used it a lot. EXS24. So you had the potential of sampling almost any keyboard or synth that you owned, and to be able to use that as a VST built into the sampler, it was pretty good. One of the selling points of the MacBook back at this day was all the I/O that came delivered. You'll see here it's got a USB port. It's got Firewire. And although that looks like a Firewire 400 port, yeah, that's Firewire 400. And the one next to it is Firewire 800, which was twice as fast. So if you bought an audio interface at the time, you would try to get an audio interface that supported Firewire 800. That would allow you to, set up 8 to 16 to 20 or more inputs, and Logic could still handle it because there was enough bandwidth. And I still have all of those cables. But Firewire 800 kind of got replaced with faster USB. A lot of devices only supported Firewire 400. I think this last port, which is like a S-Video port, but this you could plug in a mouse, which I used, or a keyboard with that proprietary connection. And then this last port was a DVI port to connect a digital monitor, which I had. And back then, you would buy a, say, 24-inch monitor as your second monitor, and it would connect via DVI. On the front, there's a CD-ROM drive. I don't think it's a DVD drive. I'll have to check into that. Something you never see anymore, but software was always delivered by CD or DVD, so you had to have one of those. If not built in, there was an external one that you could plug in via USB. And finally, on this side, there is a PCMCIA slot. At the time, PCMCIA was the standard for buying certain cards, all kinds of single function cards that would plug in there, and they would be connected directly to the motherboard. Then you've got a mic input and a standard mini jack audio output, one more USB port, and I don't know if that's USB 1 or 2, but it wasn't particularly fast. And then, what's this? Took me a while to remember. That is an RJ45 jack, because this has a built-in modem. When you're on the road, that's how you connect it to the internet. I think it supported speeds up to 9600 baud, that's B-A-U-D. Don't know, I can't recall how to convert that into megabits per second, but it's probably less than it's probably just bits per second, 9600 bits per second. So lots of ports on this thing, well made, and it's built like a tank. I mean, if you get a close look at this keyboard, all of the keys are made of aluminum. Okay, yeah, the keys are backlit. You can't really see them in this light, but if you backlit the keys and turned up the brightness on the display, the battery life was really short. I don't think it was ever more than 2 hours long. And there are 2 speakers built in, and I could tell you by today's standards, they didn't sound very good. I brought it over to my studio desk, and I was noticing that the display is, I don't know, a little washed out, especially compared to, other computers that I have. New 16-inch MacBook Pro M1 Max, and the large display I use. I don't know, by comparison, I was just surprised. And maybe this was just the way it was. So I went into the display settings to take a look. It's at the maximum resolution it would support, which was 1280 by 754, so a little bit better than 1080p. And the colors are set to millions, which is the highest level of color support that they offered at the time. So the reason I brought it over here is this. I still own, as you can see, a MOTU Traveler from about the same vintage, and it has Firewire. And I've hooked up a cable, or I found the cable, and I just got to plug that in. And then, sticking with the nostalgic theme, this is the microphone I used to use quite a bit, the condenser microphone that I preferred at the time. And this is a inexpensive Apex 430. You can look them up. It was reasonably priced. I'm going to say it was around $400. I don't remember exactly. The MOTU audio interface has 4 XLR inputs and 4 more TSR line inputs. And I used to use them all. And it has a built-in DSP. And, for the time, it was pretty good quality. By today's standards, it's not that great. But the real limitation today is that it only supports Firewire. Now, it has ADAT in and out, so if you have another audio interface that supports ADAT in, like an Apollo Twin or an Apollo interface, most of them have that. Some of the other vendors do as well. You could still use this as a preamp if you like the preamps, and you could just disconnect the Firewire and plug it in via ADAT, and that would give you another 8 inputs. Oh, good. I plugged in the MOTU, and Logic says, scanning your system for audio devices and has detected a device named MOTU Traveler. Do you want to use it? Yeah. Preferences, audio. Yeah. We've got MOTU Traveler and an I/O buffer of 256. Should work. Let's give it a shot. Audio. Tough to get used to this. Mono input 1. That looks okay to me. Signal. Oh, I see something. 1, 2. Check, check. I don't know. Okay. I see. Oh, there we go. Recording to hard drive. Test 1, 2. Checking 1, 2. I see a pattern there. No plugins, but that looks pretty good to me. I see sound. It all seems to work. And then let's give it a listen. I see a pattern there. No plugins, but that looks pretty good to me. I see sound. It all seems to work. Delay designer. Stereo delay. Well, I used to use that quite a bit. Check. Let's see. Two hard drive. Test 1, 2. Check. 1, 2. I see. Seems to work. Well, that's amazing. I mean, this thing is 20 years old. It still works. I think you would find that Firewire interface is very outdated, but it still works okay. And you'd probably get excellent audio quality. As far as I know, this thing was capable of 192 kilohertz recording. It's probably defaulting to 44.1, as usually that's the case. So one of the other things I was wondering is whether it would still run the MOTU software. And it does. I mean, MOTU uses this pretty simplistic CueMix product. But look, it's there, it's working. This was actually pretty good. I used to use it all the time because you could have multiple buses on here, and this was a good way to manage headphone mixes with the MOTU. It gave you basically control of everything that is on the MOTU audio interface from this software. The only thing it didn't give you access to was the built-in DSP effects. Well, at this point, I'm getting cocky. I'm thinking, wow, a lot of stuff works. So I fire up an instrument and I plugged in this Novation Launchkey 49. Basic MIDI. Works, but it only recognizes this keyboard as a generic MIDI controller. So you've got things like pitch bend modulation, sustain, and MIDI notes, but no control panel, no transport controls and all that kind of stuff. That's pretty good. But all of a sudden I start thinking about this. Here you've got a 20-year-old MacBook, still runs, and I'm running Logic 8, and I'm using a 20-year-old MOTU audio interface and an old microphone. This is where things started to go a little bit awry, is that I plugged in the Novation Launchkey, and I was thinking, I wonder if I can set this up as a control surface. Well, to do that I would need drivers. The chip in this old MacBook G4 is the PowerPC chip, which is really 2 generations ago. Of course, there are no drivers from Novation or any other vendor that'll run on the PowerPC chip. At the time, it was a big move for Apple to shift from that PowerPC to using the Intel chips. But of course, gradually, all of the third-party plug-in vendors and hardware vendors complied. And then when Apple switched to the M1 architecture and their own silicon, we went through that process again. And we had a bit of a transition cheat because we could run things under Rosetta. And Rosetta would do basically translation back to the Intel code. So here we are 20 years later. Basically, all of the plugins that I'm used to using will not run. They're not 16-bit, they're not 32-bit compatible on this particular MacBook. They have to be PowerPC compatible. So I did a bit of research online. I mean, there are some websites where you can get really old drivers for popular things. Those websites are getting fewer and fewer. Can you make the move from, Logic 10 and all of the plugins and hardware that you're used to using this old G4 for something productive? I think in my case, I came to the answer, probably not. I mean, why would I? But it is an interesting experiment just to look back. So as much fun as this is, there are some lessons to be learned here. If I just wanted to create a basic song with the delivered virtual instruments and plugins that come with Logic version 8, and I could get by without a control surface, I can still do MIDI, I can still get MIDI input, and the audio is great. I mean, it's as good on this old setup as it is on a lot of new stuff, minus the plugins. So you kind of put boundaries around how useful this stuff is. I can still use this with external synths as well. That's going to work fine. I did at the time, and I have a number of Roland and Yamaha external synths that would probably still work. I still have the eMagic MT4 MIDI interface, and it will work with USB 2, so it'll work on this, no problem. I'm curious what my viewers think about this. It's a strange experiment. Some of you might have old equipment like this in your closet, and you might be thinking, should I use it? Should I give it away? And I'm curious about your thoughts. I think another lesson is that every generation of new processing chips and new capabilities really takes our music production much further. There are things you can do today on a new M1, just blow this out of the water. And having to go back and give up those things, it's not something we really want to do. But if you're still on Intel hardware, and many of us still are, you'll find that it can work pretty good. But eventually, the latest operating system and the latest drivers and the latest third-party software is not going to run on that. That's just part of the evolution. I've heard consumers complain about this and say, oh, this is planned obsolescence. This is how Apple works. They want you to buy a new computer every few years. And that is partly true, and there's certainly that perspective. How many years can you get out of a MacBook or Apple hardware? I've been lucky. After this, I ended up with a 2014 MacBook Pro with an Intel i7, and it was an SSD drive. So it lasted me about 8 or 9 years before I decided to upgrade to an M1 Max. That old laptop still works fine. I have no problem with it. It just wouldn't run an operating system newer than Big Sur. But, Big Sur is 32-bit, and there's a lot that you can do with it. So there aren't a lot of limitations there. With each new generation, let's not forget, it's not really just planned obsolescence. There are new features and capabilities built into that hardware that the old hardware will not support. For example, I have a 4K monitor that I use all the time behind me, and I can actually run up to an 8K monitor or 2 4K monitors with an M1 Max machine, and I really like that. Would I be willing to give it up and go back to 1080p? No, not for the video work I do, and even for the music work I do. I appreciate the higher resolution. Those advancements in hardware mean that old operating systems can only last so long. So if you have opinions on this, I'd like to see them in the comments. Or if you have something old sitting in your closet and you want to talk about it, I'm your guy. I'm very interested. If there's more videos like this, maybe there's a series for me, which is what's in your closet. And if this video is of interest to you, click on the like button, consider subscribing to the channel. I do have some personal goals in mind with this channel. Not so much monetary. I don't really want to have ads, but I would like to get to 1,000 subscribers. So if you can help me get there, that would be greatly appreciated. Thanks for watching.